because people will then target toward a date. And there are people out there now that are saying, oh, it's right around the corner at any moment now. Why won't the aliens save us? Yeah. We need to save ourselves. This was a quid pro quo for them to get certain information from that Kaela showed me. I demanded certain information back, and actually it was information concerning the time travel issue, because they were still trying to be, they were still reticent about informing me as to what the real nature of the situation was. As late as 2001, the Looking Glass shows probabilities, or has shown probabilities. The cube would react with the people present. So there was an alteration, if you will, over what you were seeing from it. It would actually spin out as a yellow disc out of the top of it, where the word Yellow Book originally came from. Yes. Actually, I used that to our advantage at the T9, because that, in fact, was present at the T9, and I projected certain information which caused a little upset during the meeting, but I was also allowed to show them probable outcomes. So in fact, the Yellow Book, the cube, was used for that purpose. Shockingly, they happened to see themselves standing on the bones of their own families and things like that in the vision, and they ultimately decided to remove Lotus as well as certain abductions from the Tau 9 Treaty. They were handing this cube around from country to country to the elitists in the countries to look into their own futures so that they could pick the best paths for themselves. I'm happy to pass along the information. I'm honored to pass along the information that I understand that the Yellow Book is no longer accessible. I will say this to everybody, whomever took it, it's in safe hands and it won't be used to harm humanity.
How would you like to start? What's the best place to start as far as Stargates are
I've got it. Well, I've got a list of questions here in front of me, submitted by you two, all 30 of them. And, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned the number.
No.
They are decommissioned. They are separated into their three components. There's a projection component, a ring component, and also a barrel component to both the Stargate devices as well as the Looking Glass device. The Stargates also have field posts, and again, I'm not a physicist, so I wouldn't be the appropriate one to make comment as to how they work. But there were field posts that were positioned around the actual gates, and they have been stored, I guess. I'm not certain what happened to the field components, but of the three components, they've actually been decommissioned, and liaisons to the European Union, the United Nations, and NATO are actually in possession of them, and there is no one group which has the other one of the other two components.
Well, okay, so
everybody's staring at everybody, and they're not. They can't put the equipment together because everybody is mutually dependent and looking questioningly at everybody else. So everybody is literally protecting everybody else. Of the actual base operating equipment, there are three components to it, which is a projection device of some sort, a barrel, and a set of rings, electromagnetic rings.
Are we able to know how many man-made Stargates there were on the planet?
No. I'm not going to comment as to the total. I will say that there was over 50.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. In different countries of the world?
Yes.
Okay, and these are man-made?
Yes.
Okay, so, and natural Stargates?
Well, see, it's not a Stargate. It's a device which accesses.
Okay,
which accesses a portal, a wormhole,
Does it
or
access a natural, in other words, the man-made device accesses a natural Stargate?
It draws off from a natural ERB, an Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Okay.
It accesses it and somehow works, from what I understand, not in parallel, but almost like piggybacks on the energy of the natural Stargate. Yeah.
Okay. So, in other words, if there were 50 man-made devices accessing, they would be accessing a corresponding 50 natural energy vortexes.
That I don't know. There's a possibility, in fact, that when the Looking Glass was operated, they were usually worked in tandem. it required a second looking glass to be turned on at the same time to get acoustics through. So unless a second one was turned on, which was operated at one of the places where Will House had been, he saw the second node location, as opposed to the first node being over at the Papoose facility. Two pieces of equipment, two looking glasses, were required to be turned on at the same time to be able to hear acoustics or sound, if you will, from whatever the people were watching, but to go to piggyback in tandem with the visual response to the equipment. That it required two to be turned on to hear anything. And then both sides could hear the same thing. So I suppose both of the looking glasses being tuned to the same thing was accessing the same tunnel, if you will, to the information.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay, so the looking glass has an ability to show one the future, but a Stargate or or equipment that accesses a Stargate or wormhole is for time travel, right? We're talking about two different things.
Yes.
Are they using the same technology?
Essentially, yes. The original device was the Stargate device. That was then increased in power, if you will, with the use of these field posts. And how it pumped up the power, how it stabilized it, I don't know. You'd need to speak with a physicist about that.
Okay, and
however,
it increased it enough to where it became a looking glass?
Well,
or had
no.
the abilities of a looking glass?
No. It would be pumped up in power to stabilize the doorway, if you will, to step through into another location,
right.
Which, in essence, because distance and time are relative, the same thing. Step two into another time. The looking glass device was a back-engineered Stargate.
Okay.
So it was actually back-engineered from the original cylinder seal data, which allowed us to produce the Stargate access devices, if you will, what we call the Stargates. It's a back-engineered device, the looking glass is. So the looking glass is a secondary device, and it was coming into its fore in the 60s and 70s. And Will saw one of the first generations of it. From what I understand, very large piece of equipment. They always get smaller no matter what. I mean, look at what's happened with the computers.
Will saw?
Oh, yeah.
Will.
Will House.
House saw the original looking glass.
He saw one of the original looking glasses demonstrated, and in fact, it's going to be in the DVD that we're getting ready to put out, the actual interview, where he was indicating firing of a bullet, I believe it was, through an object. And there was a time delay where the bullet actually passed through the object, where he saw the bullet past the object, or the projectile, if you will, a railgun, I believe is what was being... Yeah, it was a railgun that was being used. And then afterward, they saw the impact of the device. So they were already playing with it in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, with dealing with time sequences.
Wasn't the original looking glass a back engineered from alien technology?
Yes.
Okay, but it also there was information around the cylinder seals that they used as also, and that those cylinder seals also came from an off-world race. Is that
well, no, the cylinder seals didn't. The information on them did.
Them came from. Which was maybe the Anunnaki. Is that kind of our?
I wouldn't feel comfortable in characterizing it.
Okay.
With that name.
Okay.
I really shouldn't go.
But it was off-world technology originally.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at this point, like, okay, say that was in the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, you said.
Well, yes. That's when they started actually being showing a lot of interest in actually building the equipment to be able to see over the curvature of time-space so that they could see into the future and somewhat into the past, but basically the future.
Okay. So there's also our Henry Deacon contacts said there was a black box that came on one of the crafts. And I don't know if you're familiar with that black box. Did you have exposure to that as well?
Yeah,
So
it was something that we called the cube or the yellow disc or yellow cube. Yes.
Okay, but then that was
I
not
have
a
had
looking
experience with that.
glass. Was that a looking glass?
That is a variant of the technology.
Okay.
However, whilst the looking glass shows probabilities or has shown probabilities, the cube would react with the people present. So there was an alteration, if you will, over what you were seeing from it. It would actually spin out as a yellow disc out of the top of it, where the word yellow book originally came from.
Yeah.
And depending upon what predisposition, it's kind of like little Yoda telling young Luke, you bring in there what you have with you. You know, whatever is in there is what you bring. You could then change the perspective, the tilt, if you will, the orientation or angle of the information being presented back to you. So unless you are well prepared to deal with such a thing, human interaction and human emotions bring instability of the provenance of the information.
Okay, that's what went on with the black box, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, but with
Yes.
the looking
and
glass...
I used that to our advantage at the T9, because that, in fact, was present at the T9, and I projected certain information which caused a little upset during the meeting, and they got certain abductions removed and Lotus removed off the calendar and things like that. I caused some real trouble, in other words.
Can you elaborate? Are you willing to elaborate?
Let me sit here and consider what I should and should not. During the negotiations for the Tau 9-6, I was asked to supply a model for the Lotus. In fact, Marcia and I were both asked because they knew tangentially she was involved. I agreed to do so, which is what you respond when you're a sworn operative. It's yes. Unless there are great objections. I was then taken to the location where the treaty was actually being negotiated. Give a short recitation as to the nature of Lotus. What was happening is the P45Ks use Lotus. They wanted to use Lotus for the back engineering of their own neurological problem. I was objecting to its use, but still was under orders to provide a model. I was prepared to do so, but I was also allowed to show them probable outcomes. So in fact, the yellow book, the cube, was used for that purpose. Shockingly, they happened to see themselves standing on the bones of their own families and things like that in the vision, and they ultimately decided to remove Lotus as well as certain abductions from the Tau 9 Treaty. So we were successful in getting certain things removed. I think I can safely mention at this time, because we're only one OF9 and one Tau 9 Treaty away from the passage through the completion of the passage through the galactic plane. So I think I'm pretty well safe to go ahead and mention it now. They're not going to be able to get it back, put on the treaties and all of that in the time that we have left. In other words, they got outfoxed. And that's what happens when you're negotiating in treaties.
So you use the capacity of the yellow book or little black box to show them the future implications of what using the Lotus to amplify or to rectify their own biological problems.
This is true, and that was skewed by it takes a great deal of emotion to skew the imagery and the audio that comes with it. But I'll just say that I'm extremely vehement with regard to my objection for the Lotus being used, and apparently that vehemence was sufficient to skew the image enough to get them to jump back aghast and in horror. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, okay. And this kind of, like, just for the sake of the audience to some degree, you have seen in, I guess, the yellow book or in the looking glass, and you can correct me which one it is, the future of Lotus in a sense. How Lotus becomes, once it's brought to the fore by you.
Well,
how it
actually,
gets-
no. No, I haven't. The reports to me which came concerning the future of Lotus, which we're not going to get into in depth this
Right.
evening, was given to me as information.
Oh, so you didn't see it?
Personally see it, no.
Okay,
I was told.
I see.
I was told. That was during the early years, I say the early years of Lotus. It's only been going on for 6 years now.
Right.
But this was the latter half of 2001. And this was a quid pro quo for them to get certain information from that Kaela showed me. I demanded certain information back, and actually it was information concerning the time travel issue, because they were still trying to be, they were still reticent about informing me as to what the real nature of the situation was, as late as 2001.
Meaning the real situation was, meaning how much access to Stargate, to time travel that they actually had?
Right, the whole treaty system, the situations involving the treaties, their outcomes, the actual potential for both timeline number 1 and timeline number 2 outcomes. In the case that we're in right now, we seem to be in a variant of timeline 1, and that's good. For everything that I've seen and have read and reported to me concerning timeline number 1, it's not happening exactly the way that they figured that it would. But then again, it couldn't, because we've made changes along the way, which diverted us away from timeline number 2. And in so doing, our future, again, I regard our future as something which is pretty much a blank slate. We're writing it for ourselves. And so we are now seeing something coming to pass which is slightly different than the prognostication, than the probabilities that we were seeing. And I'm good with what we're seeing so far, but we are still faced with the challenges, the environmental degradation, etc.
Okay.
But hopefully we will rise to the challenge.
Okay, so this is interesting because it sounds like Kaela was instrumental in getting you to have greater access to intelligence about what the Looking Glass was telling MJ-12.
Yeah, it was the information that he was providing me which provoked questions. And the fact that they didn't even want to get into long-winded discussions with me in the late 90s concerning what he even was. After we had argued for years to find out even where the material was coming from, then we were finally given access to the material. I mean, this went on for a few years.
Meaning, okay, but your interaction with Kaela was leading you one way and giving you one set of information, and MJ-12 then had another set. Isn't that right?
Well, they weren't really. It wasn't that they had another set of information. He did tell me basically what was going on.
Okay.
And they were simply not providing that information as what they considered a need-to-know situation.
I see. So
they just weren't going to tell me what they didn't feel I needed to know.
But little did they, well, this is my paraphrase, but little did they know that Kaela was basically cluing you in.
He was cluing me in, and he was informing me his perspectives concerning the treaties. So I knew something was going on. And that is ultimately what they wanted to know about. And I said, well, for you to know about that kind of thing, then I need to know about certain other things. It was truly a quid pro quo situation. And they said, well, okay, we'll tell you if you tell us. Right. So I told them, and they told me a little more.
Wonderful.
And it was right around that same time that Lotus was actually kicking into fore. The May 31st, 2001 event that took my prosaic project and basically threw it in the garbage can, and it turned into what it is now, this project that it is now. And as a result, I also found out from them where they said Lotus was ultimately destined. And that is, like I said, we'll discuss that in a slightly future date.
But isn't it true to some extent that Lotus could help Kaela now?
That was the perspective of the P-45 J-rods, and that is not my perspective.
I see. So, because I'd make a distinction between Kaela, who's what I understand a P-52, and the P-45. So, but they're on the same you know.
They were on the same timeline, the same track, but just separated by 7,000 years.
Okay,
yeah.
so even so,
Which is quite a big separation.
what we got. So what you're saying is that in a sense, Kyella couldn't get the benefits of Lotus because.
Nor did he ask for it.
Okay.
Nor did he ask for it. And you know, I will say this. This is something that David spoke with David on the phone not that long ago. I'll leave the last name off. I think you know who I'm.
Sure, but we can use his name if it's okay with you.
Well, sure, David Wilcock.
Okay, yeah, because we just interviewed him.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
And he was talking. We were discussing the same thing, which was the box, the cube. And I said, you know, I said, a strange thing happened. I was pro tempore made MJ9 for the 12 as a result of a bet that went on within MJ12. And I got a chance to tap who ended up being the last MJ9 prior to the adjournment. And before tapping her, who was the first female to ever set in the 12, I got a chance to look at certain documents and look through certain archives in Washington, D.C. prior to going across to the continent and meeting with some folks and telling them basically I wasn't interested in their offers. I'm talking about a trip to Brussels.
The Illuminati?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during the same time, the cube disappeared. And it hasn't been seen since. And it disappeared out of the archives. Of course, I have no idea. I have no idea where the item may be, but I do know this: I'm happy that they can't find it, because what they were doing is they were handing this cube around, and this is a question that Bill had asked, whether there was only one cube. They were handing this cube around from country to country to the elitists in the countries to look into their own futures so that they could pick the best paths for themselves. Why don't they just live their lives and try to be good people? Why do they need a little black box to tell them when to jump and how to jump? That's not being fully human, or at least from my perspective and those of our associates. That's not being fully human.
Yes.
So, as I understand it, disappeared. Now, there have been certain, you know, allegations that have been made that during the time when I had, it's almost a year ago now, when I had the bad seizure.
Yes.
It was near the end of last year, was it? No.
I think it was about a year.
It was about a year ago, and I had a very severe seizure and was actually put out of commission seriously for a while. And there was a big hullabaloo to get over to my apartment to get something out of my apartment. What that object was, I won't comment. But I will say this to everybody, whomever took it, it's in safe hands and it won't be used to harm humanity.
All right.
In fact, the fact that it's in safe hands will prevent it from being used to harm humanity. It has been thus far only used, aside from, well, I mean, I've got to try to justify my own behavior in Bandolier of using it for the purposes of skewing to get Lotus off and the abductions off, but I think that was for a beneficial cause.
Right.
But it has been used since actually the 50s by the potentates, by the leaders of the various countries to skew the history.
Wow, that's amazing.
Of the human race.
Right.
And the common folk, the average people, all of us, have a right to a future which is our own, and not being skewed and designated and promulgated and promoted and provoked by blue bloods who feel that they are above everyone else.
Well, thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
I think we probably all owe you a great thanks for that. Dan.
No, I'm